the guest sat right there, so I was weirdly close to the guest because it was a radio studio. And James Taylor sat this close. We literally were bumping knees and played 4 of his songs. And if you think about it, I am absolutely sure that nobody ever sat that close to him when he was singing, because he's never sat on another radio show and played, because nobody ever did that on radio shows except the Stern Show. And even if he was playing a song for his wife, she wouldn't say, oh, let me sit here knees to knees with you. And we're sitting there and he's playing Carolina, I'm Going to Carolina in My Mind, and Fire and Rain, and my favorite songs, and in between songs, I'm writing these horrible things for Howard to say to him. Like, so James, when you're in the insane asylum, did you used to beat your head against the wall in time to your music? And I'm like, Jesus, so I'm totally raptured with his music and then writing horrible things. But that was one of the classic ones. And then we were in England for the Princess Trust concert, and it was me and Howard and Robin here, and here was the 3 Bee Gees, and they sat there and sang 3 fucking Bee Gees songs, like right there in harmony. I was like, gaga. I mean, I don't know. And I'm not talking about, Saturday Night Fever. I'm talking New York Mining Disaster, and then the original Bee Gees. And stuff like that was just, phenomenal. Another great moment, this guy came in, this little angry guy, and he was very weird. And you could tell he had a chip on his shoulder. He's sitting there. And Howard always said the same things and gave people a hard time. And Howard said something, so, how big's your penis? Or how old are you the first time you got laid? One of his typical things. And the guy went from 0 to 60. And he went, don't talk to me like that, Mac. I am not your dancing monkey. I'll come right over this console and I'll make mincemeat out of you. And right away, Ronnie, the limo driver, and a few other guys came in because you didn't know if this guy was going to, I've been there, I was there 18 years. I never saw anybody get that enraged. And this guy was like, and in my mind, I'm like, this guy's going to kill somebody. It was Robert Blake who killed his wife a couple of years ago. And it was just so funny. He probably killed somebody. I said, I told you. And one other thing, we were doing a Channel 9 show, and Gary Busey, do you know who that is? Gary Busey? Yeah, he's just a nut. And this is like 1990. He's as nutty as a fruitcake, and he had gotten in a very bad motorcycle accident and really hurt himself. So we had him on the Channel 9 show, which was a very low-budget, horrible TV show we did that was the funniest thing in the world. People still talk about it. So we had to think of something to put each of these guests in. So we made up the Head Injury Club for Men. Okay, so we're all sitting there with bandages on, and because he really got hurt, and in the accident. So Howard's got on this bandage, and this guy Ralph, who's an idiot, he was more of an idiot 20 years ago, had a tube coming up and going into his bandage, and Ralph would squeeze a ball, and the blood would come up and go into the bandage, and the blood would come down Howard's thing. So we're making it, and the bad news is this is not on tape because we were rehearsing it. And Gary Busey is sitting there, and Howard's sitting, and Ralph is not a special effects guy. He's a moron from New Jersey. This is this idea. Oh, let's put a tube in your eye. So Howard's sitting there talking to Gary Busey, and Ralph squeezes it too hard. The tube flies out, and fake blood spurts all over Busey. And he of course thinks that we planned that to fuck with him. And I really thought that was going to be a world war, but which will live because he's so pissed, but he's awful. So there were a lot of, and the good news is I could sit here for 2 days with stories like that. I mean, it was, a guy can't, I'm not going to get crazy. I mean, it was funny. It was a lot of fun. But read my book, you son of a bitch.
How did the FCC limit most of your acts?
I still remember, in fact, if you guys send me an email, I'll give you my email address. I can email you a scan of the first thing that I wrote and it was the first time we got cited by the FCC. And this is horrible, but there's nothing funnier than seeing a legal brief from the U.S. government and seeing the words that you wrote. And then he said, and it was a song, the song, I gotta be me, I gotta be me, and our helicopter traffic reporter was Susan Berkowitz, and we called her Susan Berserkowitz. And she made some kind of bet with Howard, and if she lost the bet, she had to sing a song. And she lost the bet, and she sang to Howard, I love sodomy, to get on my knees and do what you please. I love sodomy. So I'm looking at the news, at the brief from the FCC with the whole song, and I'm thinking, yeah, me, look at that. And but that's so gentle. I mean, come on. I mean, you know, and he'd say something, and the FCC but they never paid a fine. I still don't know that it was some kind of dance, and K-Rock made a donation to somebody, and then the charges went away. It was such crap because it wasn't defined. You know, what they basically said was, we'll know it's dirty when we hear it. You know, that's like saying, don't come on my property. Where's the property line? I don't know, but when you come over, I'm going to know it, you know. And it just got crazy. Now, after I left the show, I never thought that he would leave to go to satellite, because the whole game was dancing inside the rules and seeing what you get away with. You know, me and my brother used to go nuts. We used to go nuts, and every babysitter quit. It was so much fun. Then one night, my mother hired this old drunken broad, and she sat there, and we're banging our heads against it. Well, she could have cared less. She was drinking vodka. We stopped fucking around. It's no fun if you can't get a rise out of it. You know, it was like I saw dancing outside the rules. So if all of a sudden you can do whatever you want, you know, the confinement is everything. You know, but obviously he had to get out of there because I guess the FCC got so bad that you couldn't say or do anything, and you know, and we're adults, and it's so maddening. And it's funny, I have a big thing, and everybody gives me such a hard time, and because they tell me that I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy, because I distinctly remember it was a big deal. Dancing Around the Rules was a big deal, and it was a challenge, and I loved it. And in the early 90s, Tom Chisano was the general manager, and he used to actually ride shotgun on the 7-second delay himself. Now, he wouldn't hire, you know, it was this guy, the actual general manager. That poor bastard had to get up at 5 o'clock like the rest of us and sit there and man that thing. And Howard made him write down everything that he bleeped, because he didn't want him just doing it. He said, I want to see a list of everything that you bleeped. And I still maintain that this is very subtle, and everybody tells me I'm crazy, but I know I'm not crazy. Whenever Howard said oral sex or anal sex, Tom would bleep it. And he'd be like, that is not inherently dirty. How can you bleep that? But they didn't want to take a chance because, you know, you get to the point where you push the line so many times at the FCC, you know. And one day I came up with the bright idea of, instead of saying oral sex, just saying the word oral, which means nothing. And I started referring to it as, when I wrote a note, because I wrote notes, he actually read my notes for 15 years, like literally word for word. You know, I was working his head. And he'd say oral, and you can't bleep that. What does that mean? We know what it means, but it doesn't mean anything. And he'd say anal, instead of say, hey, how about anal sex? How about anal? You know, did you have fun last night? How about anal? It doesn't mean anything. And I tell people, leaving the sex out of anal sex and oral sex, I created that, which is silly. I said, but I defy you to find a place on the Stern Show or anywhere where people use those words without the word sex after them. And you tell me, and because to this day, I'll hear somebody on the radio, hear somebody in real life say, oh yeah, I got oral last night, or I got anal last night. I'm like, I wrote that, you know, I didn't write anything. I know it makes me sound like a lunatic, but it was, if you had to be in my place with dealing with the FCC and have to come up with that dance to know what a big deal it was. It's not a big deal to anybody else, but it was to us, because when I took the word sex out of it, he couldn't bleep it anymore, which meant we were getting I always say we. Howard was getting bleeped a lot less. So that was a real feather in my cap. I mean, it sounds